You think an American passport is your ticket to anywhere? Think again. The world is changing fast, and 2025 brings a surprising reality. A wave of countries have outright banned Americans from entering, whether you're a tourist, a journalist, or a humanitarian worker. The reason? Some cite security, others politics, and some, they simply don't want Americans around anymore. So if you're dreaming of a faraway land to explore culture, nature, or just escape the urban grind, you'd better double-check this list, because chances are you're no longer welcome. Ver 1. Syria. From heritage to ashes. Syria, once hailed as the cradle of Levantine civilization, is now just a charred shadow of a once glorious empire. Every footstep once taken by travelers in Palmyra, every golden dome kissed by the sunset in the Umayyad Mosque of Damascus, every ancient stone embedded in Aleppo, now buried under rubble or stained with blood and gunfire. It's no accident that Syria tops the list of places banning Americans. It's the inevitable result of a decade-long power struggle, where geopolitics, religious conflict, and global scheming clash without mercy. In this chaos, Americans, whether carefree tourists or well-meaning journalists, become a symbol of an external force despised and hunted by armed factions like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The cruel irony, even the Assad regime, once close to the West, now views U.S. citizens as default pawns in a brutal diplomatic chessboard. To them, an American could be a spy, a propaganda tool, or simply a bargaining chip when needed. This is no longer a place for discovery. It's a political trap, with no exit and no transparent rules. As someone who once longed to stand before ancient Assyrian ruins, to hear the call of the muezzin echoing through the old streets of Damascus, I can't help but feel bitter seeing an entire culture fall into deadly silence. The death of Syria isn't just physical destruction. It's the extinction of human memory, and worse, a cold warning. When power is drawn in blood, no one, not even those with the world's most powerful passport, can walk safely through the ashes. 2-2. South Sudan. Hope extinguished. South Sudan is a bitter example of a dream of independence betrayed by its own inner demons. Born from a secession once praised by the world, South Sudan carried hopes of becoming a symbol of a new Africa, independent, peaceful, and growing. But freedom never comes cheap, and here, the price was paid in blood, hunger, and the total collapse of the concept of a nation. Just 2 years after declaring independence, unhealed cracks in politics, ethnicity, and economy split wide into full-blown civil war. Armed groups, backed by the government or local warlords, didn't just fight for land, they used terror, rape, and massacre as default tools to control civilians. In this chaos, Americans, especially journalists, aid workers, or even just tourists, became high-value targets for ransom, bargaining, or to flex violent sovereignty. The cruel irony is that America once invested heavily in South Sudan through diplomacy and humanitarian aid, but Washington's slow retreat from lands it can no longer influence is a sign of America's shrinking grip in a disorderly world. I used to think that if I ever made it to Juba, I'd witness a newborn nation, breathe in the air of rebirth, but not anymore. What I see now is a territory where the government can't control its own capital, where a police officer could be a bandit, where aid planes land and leave, never returning. This isn't a political ban. It's a survival warning. Entering South Sudan today with an American passport or any passport, you're gambling with your life, and in that gamble, no one is on your side, not even your government. 3. North Korea, the land with no way out. North Korea needs no introduction. It's the most isolated kingdom on Earth, a fortress where reality is bent to the will of one man, and an entire nation is molded into tools of absolute obedience. But what many don't realize is, North Korea isn't just a closed country, it's a calculated machine. Every diplomatic tie, every foreigner allowed in serves a specific strategic purpose. For Americans, this is crystal clear. Pyongyang's complete ban on U.S. citizens in 2025 isn't emotional. It's the next step in a carefully designed policy. Isolate, control, exploit. Americans entering North Korea, scholars, journalists, tourists, are potential bargaining chips in political games with Washington. It's no coincidence that whenever nuclear tensions rise, an American is suddenly detained for violating national laws, secretly tried, then held indefinitely. That's not law enforcement. That's the art of using people as messages. I'll never forget Otto Warmbier, a young innocent student who came with cultural curiosity and returned in a coma dead days later. That story wasn't just personal tragedy. It was a charge sheet against bringing naive curiosity into a realm of absolute power. I once dreamed of seeing the Arch of Reunification, or silently standing before the Mansu Monument, where hundreds of North Koreans bow each morning. But behind those grand decorations lies a mind control system so total, where your camera might be the reason you vanish, where a handshake done wrong could be treason. What chills me most is this. If it happens to you, no one can help. No embassy, no consulate, no lawyer. Only silence and a predetermined sentence. North Korea shutting its doors to Americans isn't just about nuclear tension. It's a message. You don't belong here. Power doesn't explain itself. And to me, that coldness is scarier than any weapon of mass destruction. Before Myanmar, where peace disappeared. Myanmar is a brutal reminder of how a nation can plummet into chaos overnight, when the fragile hand of democracy is snapped by the butt of a military rifle. From a shining tourist gem of Southeast Asia, with golden spires, floating villages on Inle Lake, and the warm smiles of its people, Myanmar is now a blood-stained stage where power is asserted not through logic, but through arrests, torture, and orchestrated disappearances. The 2021 coup didn't just erase a budding political hope. It severed all ties with the free world, especially the United States. To the military junta in Naypyidaw, America is not a country to engage with. It's an enemy, a secret sponsor of resistance movements, a spreader of democratic ideals, and as a result, Americans, no matter their reason for visiting Myanmar, are viewed with suspicion, and at times, through the barrel of a gun. Imagine being a tourist here, monitored the moment you land, controlled while booking a hotel, escorted away if you wander down the wrong alley. That's not tourism. That's a trial run inside an open-air prison. I once had Myanmar on my must-visit before 40 list, not for the scenery, but for its haunting historical sorrow. Forgotten temples, chants from villages untouched by electricity, sunburnt faces still full of kindness. But because I once loved it, I can't look away as it scorches itself beneath soldiers' boots. What chills me most isn't the human rights reports, it's the world's silence. With ASEAN and the international community turning their backs, Myanmar has become a bleeding wound in the region. And in that wound, Americans are no longer allowed. Not because they're dangerous, but because they reflect a truth this regime refuses to face. In this game of guns and fear, the presence of Americans is viewed as a spark of unrest. And so, the door shuts for good. 5. Laos. When Western friends are no longer welcome. Laos, a name that once seemed harmless on the geopolitical map, is quietly becoming a key link in the global pushback against Western influence. No parades, no shouting slogans, no dramatic speeches. Laos chooses to shut out Americans with a calculated silence. Once a backpacker's paradise, where you could cycle past Vang Vieng's rice fields or sip coffee along the Mekong, Laos has quietly locked its gates to those who once brought tourism dollars and soft diplomacy. But the issue isn't what Americans did wrong. It's that they come from a world Laos is actively detaching from. Laos moving closer to China isn't new, but 2025 marks a tipping point. Multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects, especially the high-speed rail connecting Laos to Yunnan, bring not just money and jobs, but a powerful form of soft power, dependence, and when you owe too much, you lose the right to choose your friends. Under a one-party regime working to suppress all outside influence, Americans are viewed as disruptors, carrying with them ideas of democracy, free speech, and worse, questions about human rights. Those ideas are no longer welcome. I once believed Laos would be the gateway for the world to understand Southeast Asia in a deeper way. Not as flashy as Thailand, not as modern as Singapore, but humble and profound. But that's exactly why it hurts more to see this country quietly slip into darkness. Not violent like Myanmar, not suffocating like North Korea, But the way Laos removes the West from its narrative is more dangerous, because it happens without anyone noticing. Until all the doors are shut, Americans are no longer tourists, no longer potential investors. They're symbols of a fading world order in the eyes of Vientiane's leaders. Visa bans, cutting cultural ties, rejecting cooperation. All calculated moves to mold Laos into a perfect cog in China's sphere of influence. And what unsettles me most is this. No one is speaking up because there's no blood, no images, no screams. Just a country quietly drifting out of the Western orbit. And when the door finally locks, no one hears the click. The 6. Iran, ancient beauty, hiding real danger. Iran is a political puzzle with no solution, a labyrinth of history, religion, and power where anyone holding a U.S. passport is automatically labeled an enemy. This country, with its 2,500-year-old Persian legacy, should be a dreamland for lovers of art, philosophy, and architecture. But here, in the cradle of Rumi's poetry and the stunning mosques of Esfahan, Americans are no longer allowed, not because they're bad people, but because they represent a nation Iran has chosen to exclude from the game. After decades of confrontation, from the 1979 Islamic Revolution to wave after wave of sanctions, Iran has learned one thing. There's no benefit in opening its doors to the West, especially the U.S. Even brief moments of apparent thaw, like the 2015 nuclear deal, were quickly undone by a single executive order from the next U.S. administration. Iran doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive today. Banning Americans isn't just an act of defiance. It's a preemptive defense. Americans entering Iran are no longer seen as guests. They're subjects for surveillance, interrogation, exploitation, or even detention when pressure needs to be applied to Washington. It's no coincidence that many Iranian American citizens have been detained without charges or trials, simply for arriving at the wrong time or asking too many questions. And the scariest part, Iran doesn't recognize dual citizenship. An Iranian American who steps into Tehran is immediately treated as Iranian, stripped of any U.S. diplomatic protection. No embassy can intervene, no journalist can report. It's just you, and a justice system that no longer needs evidence to convict. I was once captivated by Iran, not for its politics, but for the paradox at its core. A society with some of the Middle East's brightest minds ruled by a deeply conservative theocracy. A place where women cover their faces, yet also become quantum physicists. A land where poetry is worshipped like religion, yet a wrong word can lead to a death sentence. That paradox was alluring, but I now understand. That allure is not meant for outsiders. Not right now. Iran's ban on Americans isn't temporary. It's a clear signal they've chosen their path. No invitations, no need to prove anything to the world. They don't want you admiring Shiraz or strolling along the Caspian coast. They want you on the outside, looking in, and learning that not every beautiful place is yours to admire. In Iran's world, beauty is preserved for itself, and your presence, if you're American, is a strategic error. And me? Though I once dreamed of hearing the morning call to prayer from the domes of Yazd, I understand now. It's a dream I must let go of, because in Iran, presence sometimes equals a risk you can never take back. 10. Afghanistan, the land of shadows. Afghanistan is the final chapter, and the harshest one, in the epic saga of failed interventionist policy that America pursued for more than 2 decades. From a forgotten land, Afghanistan was dragged back into the international spotlight with promises, democracy, freedom, reconstruction. But when those promises required more patience than American voters could muster, the doors of the helicopters closed, and the Taliban, like a ghost that had never truly left, returned faster than anyone imagined. And when their black and white flag flew over the presidential palace in Kabul, one thing became clear: Americans could no longer, and would no longer be allowed to, set foot here. Afghanistan becoming a no-go zone for U.S. citizens is not just the result of a lost war, but the collapse of trust, order, and moral authority. In the eyes of the Taliban, Americans are not tourists, not journalists, not medics. They are former occupiers, remnants of a system they just toppled, default targets in every imagined threat scenario. And what's even more terrifying is this: in a country without independent courts, without a free press, Without a transparent legal system, an American detainee can be dealt with in any way the local powers see fit. I followed those final days of withdrawal from Kabul closely. The images of Afghans clinging to C-17 landing gear, the panic in their eyes at Hamid Karzai airport gates, the gunshots fired not at specific targets, but simply to instill despair. But more heartbreaking than all of that was watching those who had helped the U.S. and interpreters, teachers, activists left behind. And I understood then, if even local allies of the U.S. could not be protected, then a blue passport-carrying tourist has no chance if things go wrong. Today, no tour operator dares arrange trips to Bamiyan or Herat. No humanitarian organization functions openly without a wall of guns for protection. No one can confirm whether a foreigner missing in Ghazni was kidnapped, executed, or simply vanished into the anonymous fog of war. And the most painful part? No one knows and no one dares ask. Afghanistan is proof of what few want to admit, that not every place can be rebuilt with bullets and budgets. And for the Taliban, banning Americans isn't a strategic move. It's a declaration of victory. A victory that needs no paperwork, no press conference, only the total absence of those who once swore to rebuild this land. I once dreamed of walking the Panjshir Valley, sitting beneath the ruined Buddha statues of Bamiyan, listening to Pashtun folktales from villagers, but now I only write them down as dreams unfulfilled, because in a country where trust has been weaponized, where every glance carries suspicion and hostility, being American is no longer an identity. It's a suspended sentence, and no one, not even your government, can come free you. Not anymore. And so we arrive at a breathtaking conclusion, a stark reflection painted by the 10 countries above, not just for Americans, but for the global order of power, trust and control that's rapidly unraveling. This is not just a list of restricted destinations. It's a map of a fractured world, where borders are no longer lines on a map but ideological front lines, where holding an American passport, once a symbol of might and privilege, is now the reason a door slams shut in your face. As Syria descends into endless war, South Sudan sinks into untraceable violence, North Korea rejects every form of diplomacy, and Myanmar treats every American as a potential spy. One bitter truth emerges. The world no longer sees the United States as its center. Worse, some see it as a threat. Laos, Eritrea, Iran, nations choosing silence and control over dialogue, have sent a clear message. We don't need you, we don't trust you, and we don't want you here. Haiti through total collapse, and Cuba, through calculated coldness, join this dark chorus. A song not meant for guests from Washington. I'm not saying Americans are victims. No, they're consequences. The legacy of a century where soft and hard power were wielded interchangeably, sometimes recklessly, sometimes effectively, but rarely with full accountability. And now, as parts of the world turn away, not because they hate individual Americans, but because they've defined America itself as an idea to be removed. The bans aren't about tourism, they're about retreat. Strategic retreat from spaces the U.S. once dominated. I don't know if these doors will open again in 5 years or 10, because reopening requires more than just political change. It demands the restoration of a trust that's been worn thin by gunfire, sanctions, and abandoned allies. Maybe someday I'll sip coffee with an old man in Havana as he recounts Che Guevara's stories in a quiet voice. Maybe I'll once again walk beneath Esfahan's Islamic domes, or drift through Lao rice fields cloaked in mist. But today, in 2025, those places are no longer open, not because they're too dangerous, but because they no longer believe my presence, or that of any American, is necessary. And perhaps the greatest lesson from this list isn't about denied visas, but the brutal, simple truth. No one remains a welcome guest forever in a world learning to say no to the power it once obeyed. This is not the fall of America. It's the rise of a world that no longer bows. And in that world, every door that closes becomes a warning bell for a new era, an era where being the former ruler isn't enough to be invited in. And when that bell rings, it doesn't just wake up those holding U.S. passports. It rattles every dreamer still sleepwalking under the illusion that the world revolves around a single axis. No, the old order is rotting from within, And what the list of 10 banned countries reveals is not isolated hostility, but a new system of signals taking shape, a network of states, regimes, and forces ready to build a world where the West is no longer the center. You could call it anti-Americanism, but that would be too simple. This is post-imperial response, a swelling undercurrent. Nations once relegated to the fringes of America's influence now building borders not of brick and stone, but of attitude. And Americans, regardless of their goodwill, are cast under one label: suspicious outsider. What's tragic is that most ordinary Americans don't know it. They still believe their passport is power, that their presence always adds value, that the world needs them more than they need the world. But the reality of 2025 contradicts that, with every arrest, every visa denial, every airport without U.S. flights, every embassy that closes and withdraws in silence. In a Machiavellian lens, power never dies. It just changes shape and shifts location. And as American power recedes, a new power takes its place. The power of refusal, the power of controlling information, the power to not invite you. If you're not needed, that is the most subtle power of all. No yelling, no threats, just the absence of a handshake. So the question is no longer, why did those countries ban Americans? But, who's next? And more importantly, how will America confront a world that no longer craves its presence? Not with force, because force only slams the door tighter. Not with money, because those countries have learned to take money from elsewhere. And not with words, because the words of the former ruler no longer echo in rooms where they've lost the keys. I, even though I'm not American, feel a silent shock in this story. That an era is ending, an era where the West was the compass, the aesthetic center, the moral power. And from that ending, a new world, chaotic, polarized, unpredictable, is emerging. There's no map, no guide, and the cruelest irony. In that world, sometimes a country's absence says more than a century of presence ever could. Americans aren't being kicked out. They're being quietly sidelined. And sometimes, that silence is the harshest verdict of all. If you've followed this far, you're not just a casual viewer. You're someone searching for real, raw, and unpolished perspectives. And if what I've shared made you think, made you question, or even unsettled you, don't stop at watching. Like this video if you believe topics like these deserve to be heard. Subscribe for unfiltered political, social, and geopolitical analysis. No sugarcoating, no scripted emotions. Share this with a friend, a loved one, or anyone who still thinks the world spins on a single axis. And I want to hear from you. What do you think is really happening? Leave a comment. No need to agree. Just be honest. Because here, we're not chasing comfort. We're chasing truth, no matter how cold, no matter how bitter. See you in the next video. The world is changing every day, and we need to be sharp enough to read the hidden lines behind the noise